Well, I brought some props for my sermon today, and the first thing is I got this weight set that's real nifty. You may have seen these before, but I can adjust the amount of weight that's on each dumbbell, and so it's pretty cool. So this is 5 pounds right here, but if I want to make it heavier, I can go to 10 pounds pretty easily. So now it's 10 pounds. But the thing about our society is we value strength. Sometimes we talk about mental strength, emotional strength, spiritual strength, or physical strength. Physical strength is one of the more obvious ones that we can see. We can see how much somebody can lift or push or move or whatever that looks like. But the thing about strength is you've got to work at it. There are some people that are naturally strong in certain areas, one area or another. But when you talk about things like physical strength, in order to get stronger, you have to work at it. It can be real easy to be content with just a little bit of weight. You go to the gym, feel good about myself. Yeah, getting a good workout in. But if you stop there, then you're not really doing anything. You're just making yourself feel good, which really isn't strength. It's just almost you're lying to yourself. So in order to gain strength, you either have to increase your reps or increase your the weight that you are using. And so, see, it's heavy. need to oil that a little bit apparently. But so we get to 25 pounds and it gets a little heavier. Oh man, now I can't do as many reps, but it's heavier weight, and so I gain strength. And then sometimes you go back to doing higher reps and less weight and all those types of things. But when we're talking about physical strength, we have these ideas of what we can do to strengthen ourselves. We also have, like I said, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual strength of our bodies that we sometimes neglect. Now, there are people in your lives who have influenced you, spiritually speaking. Someone who's gone before, who has mentored you, who has inspired you, helped you become a better follower of Jesus, whatever that looks like. And you have fond memories of them, or memories that really draw you closer to Jesus. There are also people in the Bible that we look to as, maybe we call them spiritual giants, of people who show us what it means to be faithful to God, to make sacrifices for Him, and follow Him, or whatever their stories entail. One of those spiritual giants, in my opinion, is King David. David was arguably the best and most successful king that Israel had. But he didn't become king just because of his own ability. There were other people that sacrificed and fought and just gave everything they could, and David earned the success from that. And there are a lot of people we don't know. There are some we do, and there's some that we know something about. And David had this group of people called his mighty men. And the mighty men were warriors, but they each had a different role to play. See, Israel's success was not just dependent upon David. It was dependent upon individuals courageously serving God. So it wasn't just the leader. It wasn't the one person, it wasn't the king that was only responsible. It was everybody doing their part. And when everyone did their part, God gave Israel victory. And these mighty men were individuals who did their part. Now, several of these mighty men are only listed in 2 Samuel chapter 23 and 1 Chronicles 11, where it lists David's mighty men. It's the only part or section where we even hear their name mentioned. Now, some have broader stories, but the two we're going to look at today are only mentioned in these particular stories. We're going to look at Adino and Shema and how they can teach us and what it means to serve God and sacrifice for Him. But one of the things we learn from David's mighty men is that the weak don't win battles. I think too many times when we think spiritually, we are like, well, all I need to do is show up and God will handle the rest. And I say that, we have that mentality. Maybe we try to say, well, that's my faith. Sometimes I think it's disrespect to God, it's arrogance, or just not doing the discipline that we need to do to be spiritually ready for the battle that God has before us. So David's mighty men prepared, were ready, they worked at their craft. And so in 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 8, we find the start of listing of his mighty men. It said, these are the mighty men of David. The first was Adino, the Tachmonite, the chief of the three mightiest warriors among all David's men. He once used a spear to kill 800 of the enemy warriors in a single battle. Now, if you're following along in your Bible, you may have had a few different names than what I shared. I use Adino. Some of you may have Josheb, some of you may have Josheb-Basshebeth. So it's just kind of a different translation, different form of the same name. Or you may have Hakmonite or Tachmonite as his origin. It's kind of the difference between calling someone Scottish or Scotch. So it all means the same thing. But this is the chief of the three mighty men. He's the leader of the leader of the leaders of the leaders, or whatever that really means. And so David trusted him. Again, David was arguably the greatest king that Israel had, but great leaders have great followers, great partners, great people that come alongside them and help them with whatever they are doing. So David was a warrior himself. He was somebody who went to the battlefield. He was someone who knew what it meant to be a warrior, but he was not the only one. There were countless others, and these mighty men are some of them. And Adino is the chief of the three. Now, there's no reason given as to why he's the chief. He's just the leader. And we may have some clues that we can guess, but for he is the one that the others look to for leadership in the hierarchical society that they had. Now, he used a spear to kill 800 enemy warriors. Now, I've never used a spear before, but supposedly it's a very difficult weapon to master. Now, when I think of spear and using it in battle, I get the picture of like the Greek or Roman phalanx, and they had this unit together, and they had their shields protecting each other, and they had the spears that they could use over top. That's not what was happening here. This was an individual by himself in the battlefield using this weapon. So he didn't have others protecting him, which shows that he had mastered his craft, that he had taken the time to become good at using the spear. It's a little foreign concept for us, because a spear is not a weapon of choice that the military would use today. But it shows how he was willing to work hard. Now, the fact that he had this story of 800 men in one battle likely means that there were other stories of success for him. But he shows us that the weak don't win battles, that those who prepare, those who strive for greatness and continue to work at it. Now, as I said, Adino was the chief of the three. So we have the three are Adino, Eleazar, and Shammah. And these three kind of form like a special forces unit. That they come together, and there's this one story where they actually go and do something together that we'll look at in a few weeks. But this was an elite group. Now, they were part of the general army, the general military, but they were kind of in their own category. They weren't the foot soldier. They were the special soldiers that could carry out special tasks. But with these three mighty men, it's important to recognize that they were loyal to David. They were loyal to their country. They were loyal to Israel. They were loyal to God. And so because of their loyalty, they were willing to sacrifice. They were willing to put in the work. They were willing to take risks. And so we come next to Shammah, starting in verse 11. He was son of Agi from Harar. Now there was a time when the Philistines gathered at Lahai and attacked the Israelite army in a field full of lentils. The Israelite army fled, but Shammah held his ground in the middle of the field and beat back the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. A little bit more detail provided for Shammah and his efforts and the mighty men and their stories. When we find that he held his ground. Everyone else was fleeing. They were going away, going for cover, and he held his ground, and he single-handedly defeated the Philistines. But again, with Shammah, we see that he was willing to sacrifice. He was willing to put his life on the line for David. With all the other mighty men like Shammah, we see that the weak don't win battles. But he was willing to sacrifice for this. Now, you don't sacrifice for something you don't care about. You only sacrifice if you care about something. And we make sacrifices every day. And some of these sacrifices are minimal. For instance, we go to work so we can live in a house and pay bills and have food. So we make sacrifices. And some sacrifices are good. Some sacrifices are indifferent. Some sacrifices are bad. But we make sacrifices when we choose one thing over another. And so for Shammah, he was willing to sacrifice himself for his people, for his leader, and his God. Sacrifices reveal the things that are important to us. And it was important to him that this battle did not end in Philistine victory. The Philistines were long-time enemies. They were a long-time nemesis of Israel. In fact, we find that they first really start to become a thorn in Israel's side in the book of Judges with Samson. Now, Judges is a book that shows kind of the cyclical nature of sin. We have the people of Israel are kind of going about their thing, and then they sin and fall away from God, and they reject Him, so God's protection is removed from Israel, and so their enemies overtake them. Then Israel realizes what they've done. They cry out to God and ask Him for a deliverer. And God raises up a deliverer or a judge who leads the people to victory spiritually and against their enemies. Samson was one of the judges. He was the last judge in the book of Judges. And so the Philistines are oppressing the Israelites. They are overrunning them, and the Israelites need help, and so God raises up Samson. But the thing about Samson is, first off, his life was filled with a good amount of controversy. Now, he was successful. He had a time where he killed 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jawbone, which he is the only one who has a higher kill count than Adino. But Samson didn't complete his leadership and delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. All the other judges did. But with Samson, it tells us that God began his deliverance of the Philistines. So we see we're past Samson, we're past King Saul, we're into King David now, and the Philistines are still a thorn in the side of Israel. It's still an enemy that they can't conquer and vanquish. Now, the Philistines were kind of a maritime group in the kind of the southern part of Palestine, and they were crude, warlike people that really were a force to be reckoned with. You may not really know much about the Philistines, but there's probably one that you've heard of. That's Goliath. Even those who aren't part of the church have heard the concept of David and Goliath. The young boy versus the giant warrior Goliath. And so we root for the underdog. We use sports analogies and such and talking about the team that shouldn't win, but we're rooting for them. So Goliath kind of epitomizes the Philistines. These crude, warlike individuals who are out for victory. But the Philistines, first and foremost, represent unfaithfulness of the Israelites, of how the enemies are oppressing them like the Philistines because they have decided they should do other things besides serve God. They should do other things besides be faithful to who God is. And here's the thing that we learn from the Israelites time and time again, is that when we reject God, we face enemies we cannot conquer. The Israelites could not conquer the Philistines on their own ability. They needed God's intervention. Now, we don't have the same type of enemies as the Philistines in the sense of having an actual war, but we have obstacles and trials and sufferings that we encounter that if we don't have God, we're not going to be victorious. And until we admit that, we're still trying to do it on our own. We still get disappointed, and we still get frustrated. We still don't know why we can't be successful. But the context of this story with Shammah and the Philistines, they're in a field of lentils, of like pea, legume type things. It was food. And it was dangerous it still is dangerous to be attacked by an enemy on your home land, because it not only can hurt your military, it can hurt the resources and your supply line. And so for the Philistines being in this field, it means they could have either destroyed the field, destroyed the crops, or they could have taken the crops for themselves. So either way, Israel was getting weaker, and the Philistines could potentially get stronger and have more resources at hand. But the fact that they fled is not just about the military side of things. It's a sign that they did not trust God. It's a sign that they said, God, the enemy's too big. We got to run because you can't handle it right now. Shammah didn't live that way. He decided that he was going to take a stand in that field because he trusted in the Lord. Now, we don't know many facts about the battle. There's not many details, just a couple of sentences that are provided. But one of the things that we can see for sure is that the Philistines had the momentum. They were charging. The Israelites were fleeing. They were running away, and Shammah stood in the field and held his ground. Going against the grain is never easy. Now, I'm not a poor swimmer, but I'm not a particularly great swimmer. If I'm trying to swim against the current, I'm reminded that I am not a great swimmer. It's hard to do that because the current keeps pushing me away, and I can't really gain any ground. So Shammah was at an extreme disadvantage because the Israelites were fleeing and the Philistines were charging. But Shammah's name, I find this really interesting. It means astonishment. Now, the Philistines were probably beside themselves. What is this crazy guy doing? The Israelites were probably thinking the same thing. What is Shammah doing just standing out there in the field by himself? But his faith was in the Lord. He was alone, but he stood his ground. And like all the other mighty men, he shows us that the weak don't win battles. There's times where I think we confuse following God with best case scenario. See, following God won't always give us the best case scenario. We might have to do things that don't make sense in the short term. It did not make sense in the short term for Shammah to stand by himself in the field against a charging enemy. That was a death sentence. That was something that was not wise for him to do. But serving God is not about longevity. It's not about prosperity. It's not about making sure I can have all of this stuff, whatever that means. It's about obedience. It's about willing to submit to Him. Because too many times we get in God's way because we're like, God, this is how we think it should work. This is the result we want. And we don't sacrifice. We're not obedient. Shammah had courage. He didn't flee. He stood his ground. Now, don't confuse that to mean that he didn't have fear. See, the New Testament has two different words for fear. The first word is phobos, which is fear that motivates action. Fear of God would qualify in that to have the proper respect and reverence for Him. And it probably would be fear of like touching the hot stove or something like that, of, hey, we're not going to do those types of things. It motivates us to action, to do something. The other word is delia, which has negative connotations. It's debilitating fear that's consumed by worry and stress and anxiety, and it moves us to cowardice. Now, if you struggle with anxiety and those types of things, my point is not to be harsh on you today. My point is to recognize where our fear is. Because just because we're afraid of something doesn't give us the freedom or the right to just ignore it or do whatever. Shammah was likely afraid. If he wasn't afraid, then he would have been crazy. He wouldn't have been right in the head because there was a real and present danger in front of him. But he shows us that we can be afraid and still be courageous for God. We can serve Him through the fear, through the anxiety, through the frustration, through whatever tries to pull us away. We must serve God through fear. And when we get to that point, we can then realize the weak don't win battles, but my strength isn't just because I'm able to do something. It's not because I can accomplish something on my own ability. It's because I've recognized where my hope comes from. recognizes where my strength comes from. But too many times, especially people in the church, we know how to look the part, right? We do. We're real good at that. So I brought a couple of Bibles here today. So I've got this Bible, a very small size Bible, has everything from Genesis to Revelation. The full Bible is contained in here. You're probably not going to see me use this Bible very often. The print is small. I can read it just fine, thank you very much. But it's not a very accessible Bible in regards to public reading and those types of things. It's not a Bible that I'm going to display or anything of that nature. Next, I got this Bible. I got this in college. One of my professors said that every good preacher needs a good thumping Bible, right? You need to be able to hammer it home to you guys who aren't getting it, right? That's what we need. But this is a good-looking Bible, right? Right? I mean, it's a big Bible. Now this Bible's nice. It's got commentary in the bottom. Ooh, I think it's the streamline or thin line, or I don't know what it's called, but it's a nice Bible, good size. It's heavy. You know, it feels real spiritual when I hold this Bible. This is a Bible that, man, if you come into my office, I'm going to set this on my desk so you can see I got this Bible out. It's always ready to use. Those types of things. Now, I'm not sure I've ever seen anybody use this type of Bible outside of display. But this is probably a Bible that if you have a Bible in your foyer or entryway at home, this is the Bible you have. You know, you open it up, ooh, let's get a real inspirational verse. So people, or maybe we'll do a real obscure section so people think we're extra spiritual because we read those sections of the Bible too. Right? Right? Those are the types of things we do. This is not a real practical Bible for personal use. I mean, you can carry it around. I mean, it's fine. It's a nice-looking Bible for display and all those types of things. But I feel what happens is we're more concerned about making sure people see this, are impressed by what we have on display, than we are about actually letting it go into our lives. And so the weak don't win battles, but too many times we have neglected our strength because we neglect this thing. There's the same amount of power in these books. They're different versions, that's fine, but Jesus is in both of them. They're the same Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and it's more important that the Bible is opened and read and poured into our lives than it is that we have one that looks good and look impressive to everybody else. But I think too many times we also, you know, I've got this nice dumbbell set right here, and as it stands right now, you can't tell how much weight is on this. So you come over to the house and, you know, I'm going to set to the heaviest weight. So you come and say, oh, well, that's 52.5 pounds. He's working hard. He's doing what he's supposed to. And, you know, every once in a while, you know, oh, I'm going to pick this up so you know I can. I'm going to pick this up because, you know, this way you know it's not a joke that it's on 52.5 pounds. But then I think what happens is we say, you know, when I work out, oh, this is good enough. I'm just going to phone it in today. But then we phone it in with this too. We neglect the power that this has. The weak don't win battles, but we neglect the authority and the power that Jesus has given us. But then on top of that, I think sometimes we live very unbalanced lives. It's really hard to work out like this. It's just falling all over the place. Well, I'm going to focus on this part of Jesus. I'll get to that stuff later. You know, I'll give Jesus this, but not that. You know, when we can categorize it all day long, we think about the things in our lives that we don't give Jesus, that we are neglecting strength because it's not worth it. Because we sacrifice for what's important. Are we sacrificing for Jesus in a way that says, Jesus, I want the strength that you provide? Because if we want to win the spiritual battles, if we want to win the battles that we encounter in this world, then we've got to get our spiritual life right with Jesus. We can't just phone it in. We can't just say, you know, that's good enough. We can't just show up and say, God, you should be blessed with my presence today. But I think too many times that's what we do. We don't win these battles We're constantly fighting and losing because we're neglecting the strength that Jesus has provided for us. Now, there are people in our lives who we look to for inspiration. There are people that we look to say, you know what, I want to be like that person. But there are also people in our lives who have disappointed us. So some of the ways that we can learn, that we can grow, are from those positive influences in our life. But other ways are from negative influences. How can we not be like that? How can I be better than that? So today is Father's Day. And some of you are blessed to have wonderful father figures who were strong and courageous and pointed you to Jesus. Others of you had father figures that were disappointing, that were frustrating, that just broke your heart every step of the way. And so when we use terms like we refer to God as Father, some of you, that's great. Some of you say, I can't do that. You know, the great thing is that we serve a Father who is good. And He shows us and tells us and helps us understand that our worth is not in anything else but Him.